Yeah, no, that's great. And I mean, without being biased on what you just said, one question I always ask people is, what advice would you give to a new investor who's looking to make their way towards financial freedom?
I'd say it's a goal. It's a goal question. If you're like, hey, I got to get to XYZ amount of money on a monthly basis, and that needs to be, giving me cash, then maybe you're probably looking at a different slew of investment products than if you're saying, I don't really care about cash flow. I want to maximize my net worth for the long term. I'm happy with what I'm doing now, or my work is satisfying to me, etc. And I'm not really worried about like, oh, I need this, this passive, call it. Although I think a lot of the stuff that's considered passive is not really all that passive. A lot of passive income coming in, to basically supplement this, so I can do something else. So it's just what are my goals first and foremost, because otherwise you just be like chasing, I don't know, sexy or interesting ideas, or maybe you read in a book somewhere of somebody else that's achieved this goal and you're like, well, maybe that's not really the goal for me. There's a lot of push right now, of course, around um, you know a, a digital nomad lifestyle, and going wherever you want and having all these passive investments. For a lot of people, it might be like, oh, I really like what I'm doing, or I like staying in one place and building something. I like the community I have here. I don't need to be a man of the world or woman of the world. And it's more like, oh, I want to think for the long term and build some real wealth. So it's really, I think you gotta figure out your goals before you even start thinking about what's the right product or what asset class am I interested in, because the, the goal question will probably drastically change the product question.
Yeah, so good. All right, welcome in everyone to another episode of the Financially Free Investor. I've got an awesome guest here today. I met Adam through GoBundance, and he's doing some really cool things. I'm excited to learn selfishly more about his journey. So, with that, I mean, I don't want to waste too much time. I just want to jump into it. Adam, welcome on.
Thank you, Jory. It's a pleasure to be here, and hopeful to deliver a good episode for your listeners.
I'm
Appreciate the
sure.
opportunity.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. Well, yeah, let's jump in and yeah, kind of tell me and the guests or the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Perfect. So, talking to you today from Colombia, South America, which is maybe a little different story than usual, but hopefully interesting. Born and raised Buffalo, New York. Attorney by trade. Spent about 10 years practicing law in the U.S. for, at the time, two of the larger law firms in the world, really representing like Fortune 500s, Wall Street banks, doing IPOs, raising money on the exchanges, corporate governance, advising boards of directors, CFOs, etc. Of course, this is kind of all on the business side of things, but about 2017, I was in Dallas at the time working for a law firm, got an offer to move to a firm down in Houston, had a month in between. Never had really done any traveling growing up. It was kind of I'd say, very traditional educational path and kind of getting into the work path. So, high school, college, law school, go to work as soon as possible. I didn't have the year off or whatever to do any traveling. So excited to have that month between the two opportunities. Had heard good things about Colombia, had made learning some Spanish kind of a New Year's resolution. Living down in Texas, it was useful, and just kind of a mental exploration, I would say. And came down to Colombia, really fell in love with it, saw a lot of opportunity in the market, met my now business partner who was down here 3 years before I got here and really kicking off some interesting things on the business side of things. Uh, I went back to the US after the vacation, was working at the firm in Houston, really on the, I would call it, precipice of having to make the career decision of, do you become a partner at the law firm? Do you go in house for a client? Do you do something entrepreneurial? And I was really drawn towards the last of those three options. So fortunately had built some good relationships during the month that I was down here. My now business partner at the time was kicking off what we're doing with the green coffee company, which we'll talk about later, but really saw a path where my background as an attorney working in the US, working with US based investors could be beneficial for growing businesses overseas and bringing in capital from the US into these different markets. So during my free time while I was back in the US, I started helping with the initial fundraise for our flagship business, the coffee company down here, and just saw the draw of doing it full time. So I worked at that law firm for about 10 months and then sold everything, slept on a deflated air mattress for a couple of weeks while I was kind of making the life change, and decided to come down here full time. And I moved down here with one suitcase, and then I had sold my golf club, so I just had the travel bag left. So I filled that up with whatever else I could, and came down here full time in January of 2018. So I've been down here full time since then. Thrilled about what we're doing on the business side of things. We've brought about $45 million of capital into the country, working with over 300 investors at this point, almost all primarily US based, accredited investors, high net worth folks, and then just built a great personal life to boot with that. Got married here. It'll be 2 years in March, to really a fantastic person, and really, giving both the professional and personal a new look. Excited for what's ahead.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, man, what a life change going from corporate attorney representing Wall Street
Yes,
firms to now you live in
yes,
Colombia. Maybe go,
yes.
if you could, go a little bit deeper into how that came about. Um, was it a draw to something, or was it more of a draw away from something?
I think, like I said, I was about a decade into practicing law in the US. I was very fortunate to be at good law firms. So I got exposure very early on to C-level folks, got to learn from them early, was around incredibly brilliant attorneys at the firm that I was with. And I felt, to some extent, probably, I spent 6 years in Cleveland, and that was fantastic. I moved down to Dallas within the same firm and started feeling like, okay, things are a little bit repetitive. Is this move really just a change of location? But my passion level for what I'm doing is not really changing along with kind of the lifestyle move. Essentially, had felt like I had extracted the value that I wanted to get out of the big law corporate America experience. Certainly prepared me professionally for having the kind of conversations that we need to have now to move our businesses forward. Obviously, good legal background, which is helpful, even though I'm not really practicing law anymore, but still to shape issues and think about things from a business perspective, it's useful. But I think it was getting antsy, looking for something new to do, looking for new challenges. I think that sometimes in the corporate America world, and it's great. I mean, for a young person to go into that kind of environment, incredible training. To make a career out of it and be there forever, I think requires a different mindset and a different potentially skill set as well. And I just say, you know what, I want to try something new. And I also know that the corporate America big law firm world isn't going anywhere. So my downside was basically go back to what I was doing before and regroup. So it was, I was fortunate that at the time I could afford to take those, I guess, leaps of faith and try something new.
Yeah, no, it's that, and that's interesting to think about that you're like, if this failed, you could always go back,
Yes.
right? Which is
Yes.
you'd be in the same boat. And just thinking on that, it's interesting because I was talking to a friend of mine who he's an educator, and he was like,
Yep.
"Well, this is the most safest job ever." In the back of my mind, I'm like, "True, but like, why not bet on yourself? And then like, if things really do go worst case scenario, I'm sure they're gonna hire you back, right?"
Right.
So,
I think it's an analysis. I think it's an analysis that you have to do. If it's something you're considering, and it's like really what could go wrong. My fear was, and I had to talk to other people about this, was that it's not that easy to go back. But the perception was, wow, you had the guts to do something different. If anything, that's maybe a resume enhancer versus being some kind of detraction from going back. So it's good to, of course, think through like whether you're investing or investing in your career, or investing whatever it is. Think about what the worst case scenario is, or what your downside is, however you want to frame it.
yeah, I like that. And I think, at least me personally, too often I probably skip that step.
Oh,
Um,
sure,
just because I'm a ready, fire, aim kind of a person, right?
sure, sure.
But no, it's interesting just thinking about that in any area of your life. So, how has it been? I mean, have you gotten the variety that you were hoping for?
I have. I've learned Spanish. I got a Colombian wife, living a different, I would say, pace of life down here on a day-to-day basis in the business mindset. I would say it's much more strategic and planning and high level than the grind of being in a corporate job, which can be very, I would say, repetitive, but more just pure execution. So I would say I probably worked more hours from a how much time are you in the office previously, but more, I spend more mental energy now thinking about next steps, what's next on the business front, what can we do, and I guess just I would say maturing into kind of seeing the ability to move around the world a little bit, participate in different markets, be involved in different conversations, thinking outside the box a little bit.
Mm.
So I've loved it. I've loved it. Almost 5 years here now. Um, Invaluable experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, 5 years ago, you jump into the green coffee company.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
kind of where were you at? What have you guys done? And where are you guys going?
Yep. Sure. So the platform for everything we do is through our investment firm, which is called Legacy Group. So it's myself, my business partner who founded both Legacy and the Green Coffee Company. He is similar story actually, 10 years except in M&A with PwC. So PricewaterhouseCoopers had done M&A all over the world, Beijing, Hong Kong, Bermuda, obviously here in Colombia. And he was kicking things off in 2017 with the coffee company, which is, our thesis in Legacy Group is basically we either build businesses or we invest our own capital into businesses that are interesting to us. So I'm talking to you today from another one of our portfolio companies. It's called Polygonus, really big in digital education, VFX, really incredible artistic talent. But the business back in 2017 was, let's get the green coffee company off the ground. We got to start the initial capital raise. As I mentioned, my background fit well into how are we going to raise money for the business, because I've been doing it for Fortune 500s. Let's do it now for our own businesses and get those going. So we started the business back in 2017, specifically as an alternative to commercial real estate for investors who were already comfortable with Colombia. They liked asset heavy investments. They wanted something that kicked off cash, but they wanted some diversification away from commercial real estate. Ag is kind of the next step from there. You have obviously an asset heavy base with respect to farms, cash flowing business that was appealing to investors. So we did the first capital raise back in 2017, 2018. We raised about $6 million. And as we made the initial investments in the coffee farms here, and we started to really get our heads around the business, as with many things, you start to peel back the layers and you see more and more opportunity than you really thought may have even existed at the beginning. We were really trying to create call it an asset management product. But what we saw is coffee in Colombia is the country's national product. Colombia is the third largest producer of coffee in the world. And it's unfortunately, good for us, bad for the history of the industry, an industry that, despite its incredible value to the country, had historically been very underinvested for probably 40 years. So very fragmented market, not consolidated at all in terms of infrastructure, how things work, how employees are treated, what the basically fundamental economics are for the average coffee farmer in the country. And as we were starting to put together infrastructure, put together farms, we said there's an opportunity to really create an enterprise here versus just a product that would be investable. So since 2017, we've grown the business, proud to say, into the largest producer of coffee in the country. Right now, we have about 6,600 acres of land, 7.7 million coffee trees, 430 employees, and we've brought about $45 million of capital into the country. A lot of it is going into farms, infrastructure, but really, how can we look at this industry with fresh eyes, fresh capital from, I guess, call it the US point of view, where we're thinking about scale and growth and exits and IPOs. How can we wrap that mindset around an industry that is, one, known around the world? Coffee and Colombia are pretty synonymous, and that has created this opportunity where through consolidation, sophistication, adapting technology from other industries, you can really create something special. So proud to say we've gotten to number one in the country. We'll continue to grow. We're really on a path towards that IPO or sale of the business that is critical for meeting the investor expectations that we have.
Yeah.
So it's been quite the journey. It's quite the journey. I could not have predicted it from the start. I will say, I will say that.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. So maybe walk us through, you guys, I think that brings you up nicely to date, right? And you guys are raising a little bit more capital right now. What are your plans, and then kind of future growth of the green coffee company?
Sure.
And then there's a few other things that I wanted to get into after that, just of like cultural changes and how it's been adapting, and currency. So we'll kind of go there after
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So we kicked off in September. Talking to you now here right at the end of November, our Series C fundraising round. It's $100 million, $25 million of equity, $75 million of debt. We've divided the equity raise into 3 tranches, equal parts, so $8.33 million for each tranche. We finished the first tranche about a week and a half ago. We're pretty well into the second tranche. So of the 25, we've raised about 10. So we have 15 million left, and that is open to, we're really focused on the accredited investor, high net worth group, amazing advocates for the business, great partners for what we're doing, and frankly, like I would say, industry itself. A lot of people are coffee fanatics and want to find out how they can not only be coffee fans but also coffee investors. So we've done great with that market, and that's open currently. We're raising, based on that pace, about $5 million a month. So I'm hoping we finish the equity in relatively short order going into the new year. We're working with all the local banks here and some international banks on the debt piece. Obviously, it's challenging macroeconomically from a debt perspective, so we're being responsible in terms of what we're willing to accept term-wise and everything. But we're on track for really I would say a significant and exciting growth plan. So the business itself is really divided between, I call them three pillars. But you have one piece that is the grow, harvest, and process, like quite literally mountains of coffee. I mean, all the coffee here grows on the side of the Andes Mountains. So that is, how do we get the most production we possibly can from our own farms, and how do we buy as much coffee in the market from the other farmers to support the community, but also boost our own production that we can then sell, obviously, at the highest possible prices that we can get on in both the local market and in the international market. For a sense of scale, our projections for investors run through 2026. Right, this year we'll do about 5 million pounds of coffee, and we're looking to scale that up to about 50 between our own proprietary production and coffee we buy in the market going into 2026. That puts us in a competitive position to become the largest producer of Arabica coffee in the world. The largest players right now sit at about 13 to 14 million trees. We have 7.7 million trees right now. So, we're at that, call it halfway mark to getting there. A lot of the capital that we're raising in this funding round will go towards buying more farms, buying more infrastructure, working capital to be able to purchase more coffee to funnel it into the pipeline. The next step and the next pillar of the business is going from what we do now, which is selling what's called green coffee. It's basically like the pre-roasted coffee, so it has a greenish hue to it. That's what you'd sell like on international markets. Like if you're trading commodity coffee, it's the pre-roasted, pre-cooked stuff that you wouldn't buy in the store, but that Starbucks would buy directly and then roast themselves. The next step in the business is we want to move more of our green coffee into a roasted coffee channel. So that means building our coffee roaster in the US. You go closer to the consumer, you charge higher prices, you go further down the value chain, going from green to roasted, you get a bump in pricing, and you also get away from the fluctuations in commodity prices. So right now you're very subject to, okay, are the markets up? That's great. Are they down? You have to play those market conditions. If you sign a contract for roasted coffee with Walmart and they pay $6.50 a pound, it doesn't really matter what the commodity markets do one day to the next. So it's stabilization, but also an increase in profitability. The third pillar, and one that we really invented, and I'm pretty proud of, is, and I think the context is important, if you go and you pick coffee off a tree, it grows in a cherry form, just like the cherry fruit that we're used to. You have the pit and then everything else. The pit here is the coffee bean. Everything else is the skin, the mucilage, the sugars, the water. All of that, for the history of coffee, essentially, has been a waste product that's either been kind of used in fertilizer, but not really, or basically a contaminant in wastewater, the environment, thrown in the garbage. So we have, for context, about 80% of every coffee cherry that we take off the tree is all that other stuff, and only 20% is the bean. So if we have 50 million pounds of coffee in 2026, we're going to have 200 million pounds of coffee byproduct. So the question becomes, what do you do with all that stuff? It's really like the oil and gas industry, where you have the crude oil, but then you have petroleum, you have all these other products that spin off from that. What do you do with all of that waste? Right now, our goal is turn this garbage, I put that in quotes, turn this garbage into revenue for the business. So we've invested in a distillery system that turns the sugars and the water and everything, the mucilage contained in the coffee cherries, into our own lines of vodkas, gins, these consumer products that we're looking to establish. You can also just create industrial grade ethanol that can be sold for energy creation, can be used, in a whole host of different applications. But all of this reuse of essentially garbage to make more money for the business is something I'd say that we're pioneering on, but also in a good position to lead on from a competitive standpoint, because there's not a lot of people with our scale and size, but also that have made the early investments in technology to be able to even preserve this byproduct. So basically, you have 24 hours from the time you separate the coffee bean from all the other stuff before it's rotten and can't be used. So you have to preserve it in a way that allows it to have functionality after the fact. So a lot of the technology that we've brought in, and again, this is kind of how do we apply different eyes to an old industry. A lot of the technology we've brought into the business comes from the olive industry. A lot of the logistics we're using have roots in the flower industry. Basically, how do we preserve everything that comes off our farms in a way that it can ultimately become a revenue source for the business? So you take those three pillars of the business, the raw green sales, the roasted coffee, the byproduct slash ethanol slash vodka business, and you get what I would say is a nice circular business where, again, everything you take off the trees has value. And all of that requires the capital that we're raising right now.
Yeah, man, that's fascinating just to think of the possibilities. Like that's really cool. Thinking,
It's crazy. The scale is crazy. It's fun to even go through the mental analytics of, wow, what are the potential applications for everything that we're sitting on here?
yeah, yeah, no, a lot of potential for sure. That's cool. And this is
Yeah.
frankly something so far outside of my wheelhouse. Like I'm a real estate guy, and I'm trying to think of this in terms of like, okay, you're spitting off cash as you sell coffee beans, and is that getting back to your investors kind of like cash flow from a property is?
I would look at it more like I'm investing in a business enterprise where the idea is take everything that we produce, reinvest it, and grow the business to be as big as we can possibly get it, so that it's most attractive to a potential buyer or public markets if we want to do an IPO.
Mm.
So we've told investors, look at it as a net worth grower instead of a cash flow play, at least for now. We always want to run the business in a profitable manner, but we don't want to be paying out dividends on one hand and raising money on the other. You have kind of a weird situation from that perspective. So the idea is continue to reinvest in the business, call it, like the Berkshire Hathaway model of don't put out cash, grow the business, let the market kind of give people a good return on their investment by creating the best possible business. So that's the idea. If we get to a point where we can't buy more farms, we can't invest in more distilleries, we can't grow the business, then we would look to disperse cash or repurchase shares, whatever it might be. But we want to take advantage to the maximum extent possible the opportunity we have in front of us.
Mm. Yeah, that's cool to think about. Um, so maybe let's switch gears a little bit and go the personal side because
Sure.
I've thought about, so I lived in Chile for a few years.
Nice.
Fun living abroad, just different cultures. You just learn so much, about the world and other people and yourself. And so, how is that
Yes.
been transitioning from America to Colombia? And then, what's that exchange look like monetarily?
Let's say from a personal perspective, I mean, the first, I don't know, year, two, maybe even more, like everything is new and it's kind of a whirlwind and everything is like, I guess, exciting. And then you kind of settle in. Like now I basically have a family here, an office, kind of a stable, I would say, day to day versus, okay, I'm, just going to go live someplace and explore and do those kind of things. I would say probably of all the people living here, I probably have the most traditional day to day. But like anything, you get used to it. You start having meetings in different language, which at first is like, oh my god, I can't believe I'm doing this, and then it just kind of happens naturally. Like you said, it's just a continuous learning experience where you learn a lot about yourself and see and learn new things. Financially, it's great. I mean, if you're just looking at like, okay, if I'm going to earn in dollars and spend in foreign currencies, the dollar is incredibly strong against the peso right now. My wife and I would probably spend for I would say a really great life here, probably about 50 grand a year, if that, for a beautiful apartment in a building with kind of all the amenities and two vehicles, and it's just crazy. So from a life arbitrage perspective, it's pretty nice, but it's not. I wouldn't base my long term planning on okay, you can your dollars go a little bit farther here. There really has to be something that keeps you here. So if I didn't have the business and the family side of things, I very well might be out of here regardless of the savings. So it's really like, what do you want for your life, and what are the benefits that I guess you can look to leverage that are available while you're doing what you want to do. We always see, like, you hear a lot of people like, oh, I want to move to Puerto Rico because of the tax savings or whatever it might be. I don't always think that that's a good idea. Like, don't kind of let that all dictate, how you're spending your life. But if you want to do it, fantastic. I guess that's a tangent.
Oh, no, for sure. For sure. And, I was just thinking about like, there's this concept we have of retirement where you work 40
Yeah,
years, you get to this
yeah,
magical 65, and everyone pictures themselves on a beach. But, I think it's a little different. Like, I personally want to go and just take a month or two and explore a country,
definitely.
have fun. Like, you know, don't worry about kids schooling or anything. They come with us. We do school there, but just like get to know a different part of the world more intimately than like
Yes,
a week-long vacation, right? And I think
right.
personally that's important as we just grow and we're doing whatever business we're doing, like having that time to readjust and look at life differently as we go
Yeah,
through, different seasons or chapters, whatever you want to call it in life. you know, like I think that's what's going to help people live to be 90, 100, 110 years old versus, just stopping everything at 65 and then all of a sudden we wonder why our mortality rate is 77 or whatever it is, right?
definitely.
So it's just interesting thinking about, because I think for me personally, I can go great in sprints where, I've got a 2 or 3 year window and I'm like, okay, we're going to put our nose to the grindstone. But then knowing
Yep.
on the back end of that, whether it's an exit in a company or whatever it is, we can go, okay, well, we're going to spend a few months in Colombia or Costa Rica or Puerto Rico or, you know, Italy or wherever it is, right? And I just think it's
Yep.
cool. Um, at- my mind processes numbers really well, and so just knowing that, I could probably rent my house out for a month or two here, and it would probably cover however much it would cost to live in a different country just because of the
Oh yeah.
currency exchanges. So, just kind of interesting thinking about that, and no real point other than it's just interesting hearing, you live a phenomenal life for $50,000 a year.
Yeah.
And, like there's that option for anyone that's listening out there, just kind of go down that rabbit hole and explore that.
I think the point you made about And I would say like these like month to 2 month exploratory trips. I mean, for me, the month here changed my life quite literally. Gave me a new opportunity and a new, really a new place to move and call home, etc. If I was here for 3 days or 4 days and only doing the tourist things instead of, kind of getting to know the landscape better, I would probably still be in the U.S. doing what I was doing and not have, I guess, seen the opportunity. So you're cutting yourself short if you're only going for a couple of days. But literally, these trips can be transformational. Whether it's you meet somebody new or you start the build up to the trip is learning a new language or all these different things that you can use and kind of learn from the trip or learn in anticipation of the trip. I think it's critical. And literally was having this conversation today with my business partner of like this kind of what you said, the retiring at 65. And I just think I would absolutely go crazy. Like as much as I don't have the list of hobbies that would be keeping me occupied for all that time. I'm a big football fan, but the games are only Thursdays, Sundays, and Monday nights. What do you do all the other time? And then it's just like, I don't know. You got to keep your mind, going. But I think unfortunately for a lot of people, like 65 or retirement or whatever it is kind of like the demarcation line between work life and like enjoying life. I hope for more people they can transition so that it's not like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you said that, because I think that it's a problem in I was going to say our society, but I think it's a worldwide problem, right? Where people get so stuck in just hey, I've got to do this to provide today, right? Which is understandable. I mean, for thousands of years, us as humans, like, you think about it, we've had to go out and hunt or gather to literally sustain ourselves, right? And then all of a sudden we get in this like
Sure.
age where, almost everywhere in the world has supermarkets, and we no longer have to go out and hunt and gather, right? It's done for
Right.
us. And so then
Right.
just filling time, and I think it's so important that we're doing something we enjoy, because you can tell you
Yes.
have a passion for coffee, and just the fact that you can open up a whole new potential industry with the byproduct
Right.
is like, I'm sure that gets you fired up. It gets me fired up just hearing it. I'm like, oh man, I wonder what
Absolutely.
like just all
Thank you.
the possibilities, right? And it's just
Yeah.
cool to see, and it's inspiring to see how transformative, I guess, if that's the right word, it could be. And in,
Sure. And I think it's maybe it all kind of circles back to where we started the conversation of knowing what your downside risk of doing something different or taking a month off or whatever it might be, and just see what the world opens up to you. Like I told you, I would be lying if I thought I could predict kind of all the twists and turns. But maybe it takes this, moving from Cleveland to Dallas isn't that radical. Maybe growing up in Buffalo and being in Colombia is radical enough to see like, wow, there's a lot of possibilities out there. Um, just putting one foot in front of the other and trying different things.
Mm, I love it.
That's my perception.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I mean, without being biased on what you just said, one question I always ask people is, what advice would you give to a new investor who's looking to make their way towards financial freedom?
I'd say it's a goal. It's a goal question. If you're like, hey, I got to get to XYZ amount of money on a monthly basis, and that needs to be, giving me cash, then maybe you're probably looking at a different slew of investment products than if you're saying, I don't really care about cash flow. I want to maximize my net worth for the long term. I'm happy with what I'm doing now, or my work is satisfying to me, etc. And I'm not really worried about like, oh, I need this, this passive, call it. Although I think a lot of the stuff that's considered passive is not really all that passive. A lot of passive income coming in, um, to basically supplement this so I can do something else. It's just what are my goals first and foremost, because otherwise you just be like chasing, I don't know, sexy or interesting ideas, or maybe you read in a book somewhere of somebody else that's achieved this goal and you're like, well, maybe that's not really the goal for me. There's a lot of push right now, of course, around um, you know a, a digital nomad lifestyle and going wherever you want and having all these passive investments. For a lot of people, it might be like, oh, I really like what I'm doing, or I like staying in one place and building something. I like the community I have here. I don't need to be a man of the world or woman of the world. And it's more like, oh, I want to think for the long term and build some real wealth. So it's really, I think you gotta figure out your goals before you even start thinking about what's the right product or what asset class am I interested in, because the, the goal question will probably drastically change the product question.
Yeah, so good. I want to be sensitive to your time and get this wrapped up, but where can people find out
This
more?
is great.
Uh, yeah, where can people find out more about you, about what you're doing? If they're interested in investing in your guys' coffee company, what would that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we talked about, we have the funding round open. If people are interested in contacting me, we can handle kind of all the onboarding. Again, we have to be accredited investors. We have $100,000 minimum. But my email is adam.j@legacy-group.co, or you can go to our website, legacy-group.co, find us there. For the Go Abundance guys, you have a big audience here, always available through kind of the shared channels, the Facebook group, etc. People can find me there. And no, excited for this opportunity, appreciative of your time as well, and enjoy telling the story if it's interesting to people.
Yeah, no, I think it is interesting, right? Just not to go back to what we already talked about, but I'm going to go back to what we already talked about. Like
Perfect.
a lot of times you just instantly go to business and real estate and investments because like that's all easy, right? Or at least it is for a lot of the guys in abundance because it's just maybe more natural. But inside
Yep.
of that, we have a whole life. And I just really appreciate it and want to honor you for telling your story, and because it's cool, it's different, and hopefully it inspires somebody that's been on the fence about doing something. It doesn't have to be going to Colombia. It could be
Sure.
just doing something different. And I just loved what you said, that like figure out what your worst case scenario is. And I think it would probably hold true for anyone that's listening, that your worst case scenario, like you're probably already living it. So,
That's true. That's very
um,
possible.
the upside can be huge, but a lot of times we just focus on, oh well, I'm gonna do this thing that I really want to do, but then I'm gonna fail at it and I'm gonna lose all my money and die. Right? Like
Right.
that's we instantly go to the worst
Not the
case scenario.
correct, not the correct assessment of risk,
Yeah.
not the correct profile.
Yeah, I think if we take a step back and just think about it differently, kind of like you said, and you know, um, I've heard it said on other channels, other podcasts, like this, nothing new, but just reaffirms, look at your downside risk and figure out what's your worst case scenario, and
Right.
then make a decision based on that, not necessarily the emotions of what ifs, because we can what if ourselves to death, but then
Oh yeah.
we're living a mediocre life for 40 years and then wondering why we don't know what to do at 65 when we're probably halfway through our life at 65, right? Like,
More than that.
yeah, well, I mean, I think if someone stays healthy, like, you hear people living to 100 pretty easily.
Yeah.
So from the time you're 20 to 60, that's 40 years. Well, 60 to 100 is another 40 years.
Right.
So anyways,
I've,
just
I've never heard it said the way you did, of maybe you're already living the worst case. That's something to think about. Jesus. But very possible. Very possible.
yeah. Well,
Wow.
there's definitely more worst cases out there, right? But I
Yeah.
think for
Yeah.
99% of the applications and things, that's probably true.
Unfortunately. Unfortunately. Yeah. Wow.
Well, thank you so much for your time. We'll wrap it up and let
Thank
you
you, sir.
get back on their drive or whatever they're doing, and then get back to letting you do what you do and growing the coffee company for a big exit.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the time, Jordy. Pleasure doing it.
Thank you. We'll
Thank
talk.
you.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Financially Free Investor. If you found value in this episode or know someone who would find value in this information, please share with them, subscribe, and send us a review.